Having introduced you to the concepts of pitch and key in part one of this series, it's now time to discuss music notation, or in other words, how music is written down on paper. You might think of music notation as the language of music. I've known some pipers over the years who have never learned to read music, either out of fear or loathing or perhaps both. But really, there's nothing to fear regarding music notation. As stated previously, it's just how we write down music. Remember that we only have 9 notes in our scale, so there really is not that much to learn. Having said that, allow me to introduce the following ideas. Music notation is read from left to right on a 5-line staff. Pitch is shown by placement of notes on the staff, and duration, or length of a particular note, is shown with different note values and additional symbols such as dots and ties. As just mentioned, music is written on a staff, or stave, comprised of 5 lines and 4 spaces. The notes on the lines which pipers play are low G, B, D, F, and high A. The reason we denote low G and high A is that we conversely have a high G and low A in our scale. One way to remember the notes on the lines is the phrase, "Good boys deserve fun always." The notes in the spaces we play are low A, C, E, and high G, or all cows eat grass. From the lowest note to the highest note we play in the bagpipe scale are low G, low A, B, C, D, E, F, high G, and high A. Although there are 2 clefs that all musicians should be aware of, the bass and treble clefs, bagpipe music is only written on the treble clef, the staff at the top of this illustration. When both clefs are combined, they are known as the grand staff. Let's look at a staff, or stave, a little closer. On the far left of the staff, we find the treble clef. To the right of the treble clef is found what is known as the time signature, which we'll discuss at length later in this presentation. Each staff is divided into measures by bar lines. Each measure will contain a certain amount of notes depending on the type of tune. Now let's discuss the beat. If you're asking yourself, why is he teaching me about the beat? It's simply when I tap my foot to the music. Well, you're right. The beat or tempo of a tune is the rhythm you hear driving the music. Regarding bagpipe music, the beat is often referred to as the pulse or meter of a tune. Continuing our discussion of music notation, let's look at the notes we play and their value. From left to right, we have a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, an eighth note, and a 16th note. These notes tell us the pitch as well as the duration of a note when played. For instance, all of these notes are written on the B line, so I know I would play the note B on my chanter. The shape and coloring of a note tells us the duration of the note, or how long it is to be played. When considering the duration of a note, it's really basic math. In other words, a whole note is held the longest of all the notes. A half note is played for 1/2 of the time taken to play a whole note. A quarter note for a quarter of the time, an eighth note for an eighth of the time, and so on. Another way to think of it is that a whole note equals 2 half notes. A half note equals 2 quarter notes. A quarter note equals 2 eighth notes, and so on. Notes are frequently joined together by a beam, which means that these notes are part of the same beat. So, as you can see in the illustration, 1 beam is equal to an eighth note, or 2 beams to a 16th note, 3 beams to 32nd notes. So now we know that whole notes are held the longest and half notes for one half of that time and so on. But how long is that? 1 second? 2 seconds? Remember that time in music is kept by the beat, not seconds. In other words, it all depends on the beat. Here is an illustration of the different notes we have. On the top staff, from left to right, is the whole note, half note, and quarter note. On the bottom staff is the 8th note, 16th note, and 32nd note. The red numbers in the middle, 1, 2, 3, and 4, represent the beat. The red lines represent the amount of time, or more importantly, the number of beats that each note is held. As you may have noted on the previous slide, the whole note got 4 beats. This is always true. Therefore, when counting out whole notes, you simply count to 4. So when playing the above 2 whole notes, you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. As we discussed previously, half notes get 2 beats. You'll notice that when demonstrating this on the piano, I will still count from 1 to 4, but will only play the piano on counts 1 and 3, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The quarter note gets 1 beat, so they are played as follows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 8th note gets 1/2 of a beat. When playing 8th notes, we count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, such as follows. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... In the previous slide, I told you that 8th notes are counted as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, with the and being sung on the upbeat. The natural question, of course, is what is an upbeat? Simply put, when tapping your foot, the upbeat is when your foot is up. Conversely, the downbeat occurs when your foot hits the ground. 16th notes get 1/4 of a beat. We count 16th notes as follows. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. Each of the 4 groups of 16th notes is equal in duration to 1 quarter note. To illustrate, I'll now play quarter notes and sing 16th notes. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. Consider these 4 different measures of music. All of them contain notes which, when added together, equal 4 beats. Now consider these 4 measures. One of them does not equal the other 3. I'll help you a little and discuss the measure in the top left portion of the screen. The measure begins and ends with 8th notes. When added together, they equal 1 quarter note or 1 beat. The second note in the measure is another quarter note or beat, so now we have 2 beats. The third note is a half note, which equals 2 beats. When we add them together, we come up with 4 beats. Now pause the video and figure out which measure does not contain 4 beats. Let's discuss a few more issues regarding music notation. Pickup notes are those notes found at the beginning of a tune just before the first downbeat of the first complete measure. The sum of an incomplete first and an incomplete last measure equals 1 full measure. Phrases of a tune are often repeated. This is signified by double bar lines with 2 dots at the beginning and end of the phrase. Notes are sometimes lengthened by tying them together. The value of the combined tied notes signifies the duration that the note is to be played. In the tune Rowan Tree, quarter notes are tied to 8th notes.
Since quarter notes equal 1 beat and eighth notes equal half of a beat, you would hold those notes for 1.5 beats. Dotted notes work similarly to tied notes by lengthening the note. When a note is dotted, you add 1/2 of the original note's value to the note. If you add a dot to a quarter note, for instance, you would hold the note for 1.5 beats. If you add a dot to a half note, the note would be played for 3 beats. Since we know that an eighth note's duration is 1/2 of a beat, if you add a dot to that eighth note, you would play the note for 3/4 of a beat. Here's an example of how dotted notes work similarly to tied notes. In the top left measure, we have a dotted half note. In the top right, a half note and quarter note tied together. Since we know that a half note is held for 2 beats and a quarter note is held for 1 beat, both measures equal 3 beats. In the bottom left measure, we have a dotted quarter note and a quarter note and eighth note tied together in the bottom right measure. Since we know that a quarter note is held for 1 beat and an eighth note is held for half a beat, both measures equal 1.5 beats. There is a relatively common movement in piping known as the dot cut. A dot cut is simply a dotted note or a long note followed immediately by a cut or short note. Dot cuts are more common in certain types of tunes than others, such as 2/4 marches and strathspeys. When a tune is dot cut, such as the tune above, it's known as being pointed. When a tune does not generally have dot cuts and the majority of the notes are of even value, it's known as being rounded.
I hope you feel a little more comfortable looking at bagpipe music now that we've discussed some basics in music notation. Remember that, like any language, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So grab some sheet music you may have lying around the house and see if you can figure out one of the easier tunes. The next video tutorial will define and explain time signatures. Until then, practice daily and practice diligently.